There is a particular kind of person who has spent most of their life being told that something is wrong with them. Not in those words, usually. It comes softer than that. Stop crying. You're too sensitive. You feel too much. And what those words quietly install, over years of repetition, is a belief that their emotional life is a flaw to be managed rather than a reality to be understood. Psychology disagrees. And the science behind why has been misread, misrepresented, and mostly ignored until now. We live inside a culture that has decided, with surprising confidence, that emotional control is a virtue. Stay composed. Keep it together. Don't let them see you affected. The person who moves through difficulty without visibly flinching gets quietly admired. The person whose eyes fill in a meeting, who tears up at a film nobody else found moving, who cannot hear a particular song without their chest tightening, that person gets a different kind of attention. A sideways look. A slight recalibration. A private verdict. But here is what the culture got wrong. And once you understand it, the entire framework collapses. Think back to the first time someone told you to stop crying. You almost certainly weren't an adult. You were a child small enough that the feeling that produced the tears was completely genuine, completely beyond your control. Maybe something physical had happened. Maybe something social. Maybe you simply felt something so completely that your body responded before your mind could intervene. And the message you received from a parent, a teacher, a peer, sometimes from a room full of people at once, was some version of the same sentence. Stop. Hold it together. Don't. That message did not stay in the moment. It got encoded. Children's brains are not yet equipped to evaluate the instructions they receive from the adults they depend on. They absorb them as facts about how the world works, about who they should be inside it. And so the lesson that emotional expression is a liability, that visible feeling is weakness, that tears in particular carry shame, became part of the architecture. Built in before it was ever questioned. The children who couldn't stop, the ones whose feelings arrived with a force that made suppression genuinely impossible, learned one of two things. Either to hide it, performing composure on the outside while managing something much louder on the inside. Or to accept the label. Too sensitive. Too emotional. Too much. And carry it forward as a quiet self-verdict for years. But here is the psychological truth that was buried underneath all of that conditioning. Sensitivity is not a character flaw. It is a trait. A measurable, documented, neurological difference in how certain nervous systems process the world. Psychologist Dr. Elaine Aron spent decades studying what she termed the highly sensitive person, individuals whose brains are genuinely wired to process emotional and sensory information more deeply than the population average. Research estimates this applies to roughly 15 to 20% of people. They don't cry easily because they are fragile. They cry easily because they feel deeply. And that distinction matters more than most people ever stop to consider. Here is what is actually happening in the brain. For most people, an emotional signal, a sad scene in a film, a stranger visibly struggling, a piece of music that carries some unnamed weight arrives, registers, and fades. The emotional response rises and then recedes, often within minutes. For someone with high emotional sensitivity, that same signal hits with different force, at a different depth, and lingers far longer. Neuroimaging research has shown stronger activation in highly sensitive individuals in the brain regions most associated with empathy, awareness, and emotional processing, particularly the insula and the mirror neuron system. Their brains are not broken or overactive in a disordered sense. They are simply more responsive. The signal goes further in. This is why a person who cries easily will sometimes tear up at a moment that leaves everyone else in the room completely unmoved. Why a particular chord progression can physically stop them. Why a small, unremarkable act of human kindness, a stranger pausing to help someone, a friend remembering a detail mentioned months ago in passing, can bring tears to their eyes without warning. It is not performance. It is not a bid for attention. It is their nervous system doing precisely what it was built to do, picking up on emotional frequency at a resolution most people do not operate on. And because of that, they notice things. The slight tension underneath someone's casual tone. The smile that is technically correct but doesn't reach the eyes. The moment a room changes in energy before anyone has said a word. They read emotional subtext the way other people read text, automatically, involuntarily, without choosing to. Which means when they cry, they are often responding to something real and present in the environment that the rest of the room has not yet registered. There is a specific kind of experience that almost every person who cries easily knows intimately. It is the moment they encounter someone else's pain and feel it not as an observation but as an event inside their own body. A tightness in the chest. A weight in the throat. Eyes that fill before any conscious decision to feel anything has been made. Psychologists call this empathic resonance, the neurological process by which we do not merely understand another person's emotional state but mirror it internally. In highly empathic people, that mirroring is not subtle. It is immediate, physical, and often overwhelming. Sitting across from a friend who is trying to hold it together, watching a news story about loss, passing a stranger who is crying quietly in a public space, for someone with high emotional sensitivity, these are not background events. They land fully. And what most people never consider is the cumulative weight of that. These people are not just navigating their own emotional lives. They are absorbing fragments of everyone else's, in every room they enter, often without any way to switch it off. The social exhaustion that highly sensitive people describe after ordinary interactions is not introversion and not fragility. It is the cost of being tuned in at a frequency that never goes quiet. And then they go home and the feeling does not leave. Most people feel an emotion, move through it, and come out the other side within hours. For people who cry easily, the processing runs longer. They replay conversations. They lie awake revisiting a look on someone's face. They can return to a moment from years ago and feel something close to the original emotion resurface without warning. This is called emotional rumination, not a choice, not a dramatization, but a feature of a mind that processes meaning more thoroughly and holds experience more completely than average. The same depth that makes them difficult to shake also makes them harder to fool. They see further into situations and people precisely because they haven't moved on quickly enough to miss anything. There is also something happening at the biochemical level that science has only recently begun to examine seriously. Emotional tears, not the tears produced to keep eyes lubricated, but the ones connected to feeling, carry immeasurably different chemical composition. They contain elevated levels of stress hormones, including cortisol. Which means crying may be one of the mechanisms by which the body physically clears the residue of emotional stress. The relief many people report after a genuine cry, that specific sensation of pressure released, of something settling that had been wound tight, is not imaginary. It may be the nervous system completing a biological cycle it needed to finish. For people who cry easily, this cycle runs more frequently. Not as dysfunction, as maintenance. A pressure cooker with a working release valve is safer than one that has been sealed shut. The person who cries when they need to is not falling apart. They are, in the most literal sense, regulating. And in the areas of life where emotional depth actually matters, in relationships, in trust, in the quality of attention one person gives another, these people tend to be quietly exceptional. not because they have trained themselves to be present, but because they cannot be anything else. They listen in a way that makes people feel genuinely heard, not because they learned the technique but because they are actually absorbing what is being said and what is not being said simultaneously. They care without having to manufacture it. They notice what others miss. And they remain, despite everything this culture does to discourage it, genuinely permeable to the full range of human experience, the grief, the beauty, the strange tenderness of ordinary moments that most people have learned to pass through without feeling. So consider this. The person in the room who never flinches, who keeps a perfectly composed face through everything, who has mastered the performance of being unmoved, we have decided to call that person strong. But what did it cost them to get there? What did they have to close off, armor over, train themselves not to feel? And is that strength, or is that a very sophisticated form of absence? The person who still feels it, who has not traded their sensitivity for social approval, who cries when something is genuinely worth crying about, that person is not weak. They are still here. Still present. Still connected to the actual weight of being alive. That is not something to fix. That is something to finally, clearly understand. So I want to ask you directly, and I want you to actually sit with this before you answer. Do you think crying easily is a sign of weakness? Or do you think it takes more courage to stay open than to close yourself off? Leave your answer in the comments. There is no correct answer. But your honest one might tell you something. Is crying easily weakness, or does staying open take more courage than closing off? Leave your honest answer below.